poor 12-year-old black girl saved a millionaire who was being beaten up in an alley. But what he whispered to her made her cry. Stop hitting him. The scream pierced the early morning silence as Jasmine Carter pointed her broken flashlight at three hooded men. At 12 years old, weighing 40 pounds wet, she shouldn't have been facing armed thugs in a smelly alley in the city center. But there she was, trembling with fear and determination, while a man in an expensive suit bled on the dirty ground, being brutally kicked by three criminals who clearly hadn't expected a witness. The scene was surreal. Jasmine had left home just to pick up medicine for her grandmother at the all-night pharmacy, the only one open after midnight that accepted welfare vouchers. The shortcut through the alley had always been dangerous, but it was the only way she knew when she couldn't afford the bus. Get out of here, girl, growled the largest of the attackers, but something in Jasmine's steady gaze made him hesitate. It wasn't just courage, it was the expression of someone who had faced difficult situations before and learned not to back down. Maybe it was the way she held that flashlight as if it were a weapon, or maybe it was the absurd determination in her voice when she screamed even louder. Someone help me. Police. People are beating a man here. Her voice echoed off the brick walls, breaking the early morning silence. Suddenly, lights began to flicker on in the surrounding apartments. Windows opened, confused voices rose, and the sound of distant sirens began to grow closer. The thugs looked at each other, cursed in low voices, and fled like rats into the shadows, leaving behind only the echo of their footsteps and the smell of violence in the air. Jasmine ran to the fallen man, her worn sneakers making noise against the wet asphalt. Blood trickled from a deep cut on his forehead, staining his suit, which probably cost more than her mother earned in 6 months cleaning offices on the night shift. But it was the look in his eyes that worried her, a mixture of physical pain and something deeper, as if those criminals had broken more than just his ribs. Stay with me, okay? Don't fall asleep, she whispered, taking off her thin coat to press against his head wound. It was the only coat she had for the approaching winter, but she didn't think twice. Her small hands, calloused from helping her mother with sewing, pressed the fabric with a gentleness that contrasted with the firmness of her voice. Why are you, he murmured, confused, trying to focus on the face of this black girl with curly hair who was saving his life without even knowing him. His blue eyes, blurred from the blow, tried to process the scene. A child from the slums, clearly poor, risking her own safety for a complete stranger. Because it's the right thing to do, Jasmine replied simply, as if it were obvious. My grandmother always said that you're only measured by the help you give when no one is looking. And besides, she added with a shy smile, you seem like a good person. I don't know intuition. Sirens were approaching quickly now. The man was able to focus better on her face in the flickering yellow light of the broken street lamp. Large, smart eyes that sparkled with intelligence, curly hair escaping from a simple ponytail, a determination that didn't match her age. It was like looking at someone who had weathered far worse storms and lived to tell the story, despite her being only 12 years old. What's your name, brave girl? He managed to ask, his voice steadier now. Jasmine Carter. And you, sir? David Harrison. He swallowed hard, still processing what had happened. You saved my life. They were going to kill me. Paramedics arrived in a noisy ambulance, followed closely by 2 police cars. But before the chaos of the rescue took over the scene, David held Jasmine's small hand for a moment. His eyes filled with tears, not from physical pain, but from something much deeper that she couldn't quite identify yet. Jasmine, he whispered urgently, as if he wanted to speak before the paramedics took him away. What came out of his mouth made her freeze in shock and confusion. It was only 4 words, but they carried an emotional weight that would change everything. I knew your mother. There, holding the hand of a stranger as red and blue lights painted the dirty alley, Jasmine had no idea that she had just saved one of the most powerful men in the country, much less that his desperate whisper would reveal a connection from the past that would explain why her family had always struggled, even though her mother was one of the hardest working people she knew. As paramedics prepared David for transport, he couldn't take his eyes off her. There was something in that look, a mixture of gratitude, recognition, and a deep guilt that made Jasmine feel like her life was about to change forever. If your heart is racing from this story of unlikely courage, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Jasmine doesn't know yet is that her simple act of kindness has just uncovered a secret buried for years that will not only explain her family's poverty, but also set off a chain of events that will rewrite the concept of justice forever. 3 days had passed since the rescue, and Jasmine couldn't get those 4 words out of her head. I knew your mother. How was that possible? Her mother, Carmen Carter, had been cleaning offices since she was 16. She had never mentioned knowing any millionaires, let alone David Harrison, whose name was now all over the news as the businessman attacked by criminals and saved by an unlikely heroine. The first clue came in the form of a thick envelope delivered personally to the door of her apartment in the housing project. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a simple card, to Jasmine, with eternal gratitude. I would like to talk to you and your mother when you feel ready. David Harrison. Carmen held the check with trembling hands, her face draining of color. Mom, are you okay? Jasmine asked, but the answer came in the form of silent tears streaming down her mother's face. We can't accept this, Carmen whispered, trying to fold the check back up. Why? He wants to help us. He said he knows you. The silence that followed was too heavy for a normal conversation between mother and daughter. Carmen looked away, but Jasmine had inherited her stubbornness, which made her question injustice. Mom, what are you not telling me? Meanwhile, across town, in an office with a panoramic view of Manhattan, Victoria Sterling watched David Harrison through the glass wall of her office. As CEO of Harrison Industries, she had built her career as the person who solved delicate problems for the company. And now, David was becoming a very delicate problem. What does he want? Victoria asked the assistant who had just handed her a memo. Mr. Harrison has requested a full investigation into the circumstances of the attack. He has also asked you to locate all company employee records from the last 20 years. Specifically, any documents related to a Carmen Carter. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. Carmen Carter. That name had been buried decades ago for good reason. If David was investigating the past, especially that particular period, the entire structure she had built could come crashing down. Cancel that investigation, she ordered, her voice maintaining the professional calm that had made her feared in the corporate corridors. Tell Mr. Harrison we're dealing with more pressing matters at the moment. But David Harrison was not the kind of man who took no for an answer, especially after looking into the eyes of that brave girl who had risked her life to save him. There was something about Jasmine's determination that painfully reminded him of Carmen at 16, the same age she had been when she worked as an intern at Harrison Industries. The same age she was when Victoria Sterling orchestrated her dismissal under false accusations of theft. David still remembered the morning Carmen was escorted out of the building, 6 months pregnant, tears streaming down her face as security guards searched her purse for documents she had never stolen. He was just a junior executive at the time, with no power to intervene, but the image of injustice had haunted his conscience for years. Now, seeing Jasmine, who had clearly inherited her mother's moral strength, David realized that fate had given him a second chance to right a past wrong. Victoria, however, had other plans. She hadn't eliminated Carmen Carter from David's life 20 years ago to allow her daughter to now threaten everything he had worked for. If David was determined to dig up the past, she would need to make sure that the version of the story he found was the version she controlled. Schedule a meeting with the Carter family, Victoria instructed her assistant, a cold smile playing on her lips. It's time to meet our little heroine in person. Jasmine, who had spent the last 3 days trying to process how drastically her life had changed, had no idea she was about to become the center of a war between two worlds, one she had saved by instinct, and one that had destroyed her family before she was even born. Each new tear she saw on her mother's face only intensified something growing inside her. Not exactly anger, but a quiet determination that whispered that some injustices were too great to be ignored. What Victoria Sterling couldn't imagine was that underestimating a 12-year-old girl who had faced armed thugs in a dark alley would be the biggest strategic mistake of her career. The meeting took place in the luxurious office of Harrison Industries, with Victoria Sterling commanding the scene like a veteran actress on a stage she knew by heart. Jasmine and Carmen sat in leather chairs that probably cost more than 6 months' rent for their apartment, while Victoria smiled with the calculated warmth of someone who knew exactly how to manipulate every word. Jasmine, you're really special, Victoria began, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. David can't stop talking about your courage. It's inspiring to see a young woman so determined to overcome your circumstances. The way she said circumstances made Jasmine frown. There was something about the choice of words, the slightly condescending tone, that bothered her deeply. We want to help your family in any way we can, Victoria continued, sliding a contract across the table. We thought about a scholarship fund, maybe a new home, far away from here. A fresh start for the two of you. Carmen flipped through the document, her eyes filling with tears. It was more money than she could earn in a lifetime cleaning offices. But Jasmine watched Victoria with the same intensity she had used to face the thugs in the alley. There was something wrong here, something her 12-year-old intuition picked up on even if her mind couldn't quite process it yet. Why far away from here? Jasmine asked, her voice small but firm. We like our neighborhood. Victoria laughed, a crystal clear sound that didn't reach her eyes. Honey, a smart girl like you deserves better opportunities. Private schools, music lessons, ballet maybe? Things that people like you don't normally have access to. There it was. People like you. Jasmine felt something cold form in her stomach. She had heard that tone before. At school when some teacher spoke to her. At the supermarket when security guards followed her through the aisles. On the street when people crossed to the other side when they saw her and her mother. Mrs. Sterling, Jasmine said, choosing her words carefully. Mr. David said he knew my mother. Did you know her too? For a split second, Victoria hesitated. It was almost imperceptible, but Jasmine had learned to read micro-expressions, living in a world where her safety often depended on understanding people's real intentions. Not directly, dear, but I heard about her through David. Jasmine nodded, but mentally noted the first inconsistency. David had whispered those words as if they were a personal secret, not something he would casually share with co-workers. That night, while Carmen read and reread the contract with hopeful eyes, Jasmine did something her mother didn't expect. She called the public library and asked to speak to Mrs. Martinez, the librarian who always helped her with school research. Ms. Martinez, could you help me find some information about a company? It's for a school project, Jasmine lied, her voice maintaining the innocence of a curious child. Of course, dear. Which company? Harrison Industries, especially about former employees. What Jasmine discovered in the next 2 hours of research at the library made her realize that her instincts were right. Old newspaper articles mentioned frequent restructuring at the company, always involving layoffs of minority employees. Victoria Sterling appeared in several corporate photos over the years, always smiling, always at the center of power. But it was an article buried in the digital archive from 20 years ago that made her heart stop. Pregnant teen fired for alleged theft. Harrison Industries denies discrimination. The black and white photo showed a 16-year-old girl being escorted out of a building, pregnant, tears streaming down her face. The name in the caption confirmed her worst fears, Carmen Carter. Jasmine stared at the screen, pieces falling into place like a puzzle solving itself. Her mother had worked at Harrison Industries. She had been fired under false accusations. David knew her mother because he was there when it happened. And Victoria Sterling? The article mentioned that the internal investigation had been conducted by the then Human Resources Manager, Victoria Sterling. Jasmine printed out every article she could find, her small fingers working with the determination of someone much older. She had saved David Harrison on instinct, out of simple kindness. But now she realized that fate had placed something much more powerful in her hands, the chance to get justice for her mother after 2 decades of silence. As she walked home, the articles folded neatly in her school bag. Jasmine smiled for the first time in days. Victoria Sterling had made a crucial mistake. She had underestimated a 12-year-old girl who had faced armed thugs in a dark alley. What Victoria couldn't imagine was that the same courage that had saved David Harrison was now being directed towards something much more personal. Jasmine had learned something important in that library. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't just getting justice. It's making those who hurt you destroy themselves with their own weapons. For a moment, when Victoria had offered that contract with her fake smile, everyone thought they were seeing just another poor family being saved by corporate generosity. But those who know true determination know that it grows stronger when someone tries to buy you with crumbs of what was stolen from you. And Jasmine Carter was about to show that some debts from the past, when finally paid, accrue interest that no check can pay. The second meeting took place a week later, but this time David Harrison was present. Victoria had insisted on finalizing the details of the agreement in her main office, surrounded by expensive paintings and corporate trophies that attested to her years of power in the company. Jasmine, dear, I hope you and your mother have thought carefully about our offer, Victoria began, her confident smile revealing that she was absolutely certain she was in control of the situation. A bright future awaits you, far away from unnecessary complications. Jasmine nodded politely, her school bag on her lap. Yes, Mrs. Sterling. Actually, I'd like to ask a few questions before signing anything. Just kid stuff, you know. Victoria laughed, relaxing in her executive chair. Of course, dear. Ask me anything. You said you heard about my mother through Mr. David, but I was researching the company for a school project. Jasmine opened her backpack and took out a simple folder, and I found some interesting things in the old library archives. Victoria's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. David leaned forward, curious. Look, Jasmine placed the first article on the table, her voice maintaining the innocence of a student presenting a school project. This article from 20 years ago is about an employee who was fired for theft. Carmen Carter, 16 years old, 6 months pregnant. The blood drained completely from Victoria's face. David picked up the article, his eyes scanning the lines with growing horror and recognition. David, Carmen whispered, tears streaming down her face. I never stole anything. I swear to God, I never. I know, David said, his voice breaking. I always knew. Jasmine continued, placing more articles on the table with the surgical precision of an experienced prosecutor. This one mentions that the investigation was conducted by the Human Resources Manager at the time, a Victoria Sterling. That's enough, Victoria stood up abruptly, but her voice betrayed the panic she was trying to hide. This is a pathetic attempt at blackmail. Blackmail. Jasmine interrupted, her voice losing all childish sweetness and taking on a coldness that made Victoria recoil. No, Ms. Sterling. This is called justice delayed. David was on his feet now, the articles in his hands trembling. Victoria, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't destroy the life of an innocent 16-year-old girl. It was necessary, Victoria exploded, her mask of refined executive finally slipping. She was a threat. A poor, black, pregnant girl, questioning procedures, asking too many questions. If she wasn't dealt with, others like her would come. Like her. David repeated, his voice icy. You mean honest workers? People with integrity. Jasmine placed the last article on the table. This one is the most interesting. It talks about how several similar dismissals have happened under the supervision of the same person over the years. Always minorities. Always under false accusations. Victoria realized she was cornered. Her desperate eyes darted around the room, searching for an exit that didn't exist. You don't understand how the corporate world works. Sometimes tough decisions have to be made to protect. To protect what? David interrupted, his voice rising. Her own prejudices? Her sick need for control. David, you can't be thinking of believing her. Victoria pointed at Jasmine, her composure completely shattered. She's just a manipulative child trying to extort money. A child, Jasmine said calmly, who saved your life and uncovered your truth. You're right about one thing, Mrs. Sterling. I am just a child, but a child who grew up watching her mother cry every night for 20 years, wondering why she was being punished for something she never did. David turned to Victoria, his face contorted with anger and disappointment. 20 years, Victoria. 20 years I carried the guilt of not defending Carmen when she was humiliated and expelled. And all the while, you were the one orchestrating it all. I built this company. Victoria shouted, completely losing control. I protected her from people who didn't belong in our world. The silence that followed was deafening. David walked over to his desk and picked up the phone. Security, I need you to escort Mrs. Sterling out of the building. Today is her last day at Harrison Industries. You can't do this to me. Victoria protested, but her voice sounded desperate now. I have contracts, agreements, which will be null and void, David replied coldly. Racial discrimination, document falsification, harassment. I'm sure our lawyers will find plenty of other violations when they review your 20 years of management. As security arrived, Victoria shot Jasmine one last venomous look. You think you've won? A girl like you will never belong in this world, no matter what they do. You're right, Jasmine said, rising with a dignity that contrasted with Victoria's despair. I will never belong in your world, because your world is built on lies, prejudice, and the destruction of innocent people. I'd rather build a better world. When Victoria was escorted out, leaving behind 20 years of power and manipulation, David knelt in front of Jasmine. I'm so sorry, he said, tears in his eyes. For your mother, for you, for not being brave enough to do the right thing 20 years ago. Jasmine took his hands. Sometimes justice is slow, Mr. David, but when it finally comes, she comes complete. In the center of that office where Victoria had once reigned through fear and discrimination, a new reality was now taking shape. Like a symphony that finally finds its harmony after years of discordant notes, proving that true strength does not come from the power to destroy others, but from the courage to stand up for what is right, even when you are only 12 years old and carry a school bag full of evidence that can bring down empires built on injustice. 6 months later, Jasmine walked through the gleaming corridors of Harrison Industries, no longer as a nervous visitor, but as the youngest social responsibility consultant in the company's history. David had created a special mentoring program for young people from disadvantaged communities, and who better to lead this initiative than the girl who had transformed an entire company with nothing but courage and a few newspaper articles. Carmen now worked as the human resources director at the same company that had unfairly fired her 2 decades earlier. Her first order of business had been to implement strict anti-discrimination policies and create diversity programs that became a model for other corporations. The irony was not lost on anyone, especially Victoria Sterling. Victoria, for her part, discovered that the corporate world has a long and unforgiving memory when it comes to discrimination scandals. No prestigious company would accept her resume after her wrongful termination became public. Her 20 years of management experience were now seen as 2 decades of toxic practices that no responsible employer would want to associate with their brand. The luxurious apartment was sold to pay for lawyers during the multiple lawsuits that arose when other employees found the courage to speak out about years of bullying and discrimination. The woman who once controlled professional destinies with a simple phone call now worked in a call center, fielding complaints from angry customers. A twist Jasmine found poetically appropriate. You know what impresses me most about this whole story? David asked Jasmine during one of their weekly conversations in the office that had once belonged to Victoria. It wasn't just that you saved my life in that alley. It was that you saved the soul of this company. Jasmine smiled, leafing through a report on the new student scholarship program that would bear her name. My grandmother always said that when you do the right thing, the universe conspires to make it happen. Sometimes it just takes a little longer than we'd like. Carmen entered the room, carrying a stack of resumes from applicants for the diverse internship program they had created. His eyes still glistened with tears of pride every time he saw Jasmine in that environment, not as a tolerated intruder, but as a respected leader shaping the future of the company. Applications for the Jasmine Carter program reached 5,000 young people this month, Carmen announced, her voice heavy with emotion. Kids from all over the country wanting to follow in her footsteps. David nodded in admiration. A 12-year-old girl with a broken flashlight achieved what years of corporate diversity training never could: real, lasting change. What impressed everyone most was how Jasmine maintained her natural humility despite all the recognition. When reporters asked her about her strategy for taking down Victoria, she always responded with the disarming simplicity of someone who genuinely didn't understand all the fuss. I just asked a few questions and did some research in the library, she would say, shrugging her shoulders. If that's strategy, then every kid who does their homework is a military genius. But those who knew Jasmine well knew that there was something much deeper at play. Her courage didn't come from an elaborate plan or a thirst for revenge. It came from a simple, unshakable belief that people deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of their background or the color of their skin. Victoria Sterling had built an entire career on the premise that some people didn't belong in certain spaces. Jasmine Carter had destroyed the premise not with anger or vengeance, but by proving that belonging isn't something others grant you. It's something you earn with character, competence, and courage. Today, when Jasmine walks through the halls of Harrison Industries, secretaries who once wouldn't have noticed her now greet the girl who changed everything warmly. Executives who once would have crossed the street to avoid a black kid from the projects now ask her for advice on how to make their companies more inclusive. Jasmine's real victory wasn't destroying Victoria Sterling. It was building a world where future Victoria Sterlings can thrive. Where kids like her don't need broken flashlights and desperate courage to be heard. Where doing the right thing isn't exceptional heroism, but basic expectation. As Jasmine always says when she tells her story, the best revenge isn't bringing those who hurt you down to your level. It's rising so high they can't reach you, and then throwing them a rope to help others climb up too. If this story of a girl who turned injustice into opportunity touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to discover how small acts of courage can rewrite entire destinies and prove that sometimes all we need to change the world is a public library, a few right questions, and an absolute refusal to accept that that's just the way things are as a definitive answer to any injustice.